Yesterday, I listened to an exquisite podcast on the lifestylist with a woman called Veda Austin, who does this incredible research on water. I highly, highly recommend listening to it, even though it's long. It's an amazing, amazing conversation. And so it's inspired me today to talk about consciousness. Now, for some of you, I might have lost you right there. And for others, you might understand what consciousness is, or maybe you're curious about it. But for me, it's a really important conversation because even though I'm here looking at kind of our inner world and, how to be with our humanity and our divinity, if I'm honest, but doing all of this internal work, it's really important actually to talk about consciousness because it's kind of like wanting to study fish and ignoring the fact that they live in water, that they are a part of the water. So consciousness goes hand in hand with doing the inner work, with growth, with evolution, because we are consciousness. So I want to dive deeper into this topic. It's going to be vast. It's going to be maybe esoteric, but as I always try to do, to really pull it into the practical, the earthly, the human experience of it. So it's not going to go too far off into the clouds, but we'll travel a bit. So that's what we're going to dive into today. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. The reason why I love these kind of conversations is because it's almost like recognizing the thread that weaves through everything. And it kind of brings us back into a state of magic or wonder, or kind of like this childlike, wow, this is what life is about. This is what existence is about. It just brings back a sense of almost elation and light into our lives, because it's really all too easy to get bogged down by reality. Well, we call it reality, but sometimes I think it's more of a story or more of a dream than what is really truly real. But it's easy to get caught up in our day-to-day life. It's easy to get caught up in our fears, in our insecurities, in our anxieties, in the dramas, in the challenges. And you know what? That's all okay, because it's a part of life and it's part of being human. And so I often think that it's this kind of dance that we're learning to integrate within us between our human self and our soul, essentially, because they're in partnership, they're in union and communion together. And so one is not better or worse, one is not good and the other evil. I don't like how in the spiritual community there's so much vilifying of the ego. The ego is what gives us a personality and what, gives us this form of being human. There's nothing wrong with it, but like anything, it's how do we work with it? How do we use it? Is it healthy or unhealthy? Anything has its healthy version and its unhealthy version. It has the light side and the shadow. There's always two sides of the coin. But I think the moment that we vilify a part of our just own existence, we're severing ourselves from ourselves. And I don't think the point is to transcend our human experience, because why would we be here having a human experience if the point was to get out of it? I think there's so much information and wisdom and experience, and therefore growth to be had and evolution to be had through this human experience. What are we learning here? This is the school of life in this embodiment of being human, which is kind of really far out. And it's very interesting to the soul. So don't vilify any part. Don't put any part on a pedestal and then, shame away another part of you. They're all just parts, and it's okay. It's the fabric of this experience. So I will always return to, when we include all parts of ourselves, that's when we return home, because we fall naturally into the lap of love and acceptance. And that's where we find peace. So if you're fighting against yourself, you're just perpetuating more suffering. So going back to why I love this conversation, and because it's so easy to get caught up in kind of our daily lives, especially when you're really doing the internal work, because you're shedding a light on a lot of things that have been in the dark for a long time. And sometimes it can feel tiring or like, oh God, I have a lot of work to do. There's a lot to look at. There's a lot to process. And I think it's really helpful to sometimes zoom out a little bit. And so when we have the conversation about consciousness, it's like taking the focus, using the analogy that I used at the beginning, off of just the fish. And now we're looking at the whole world that is the ocean. And we're understanding how everything is interconnected. And when we recognize that everything is interconnected, it gives us a sense of comfort, safety, peace, and therefore we can relax into things, because I think now more than ever, because we're so disconnected from nature and our inner nature and who we truly are, there's a lot of fear. When you remove yourself from home, and then when you inject a lot of fear, which I talked about last week, it's easy to forget who we are, and it's just easy to stay in that space where everything feels a little bit unsafe. We don't really trust what is naturally there. We don't trust the amount of support we have. We don't trust the inner guidance and the unseen guidance that's around us, because we're disconnected. We're far from home. When we're far from home, we forget and we feel more afraid. When we come closer to home and we remember not only who we truly are, but we remember how things are. We remember old things. Then that feels like home, and then we feel safe. We have this illusion of safety through control. Let me control others. Let me control things. Let me make sure I don't lose my things. Let me hold on to this thing or this person, or let me, avoid death and avoid this and everything. All of that is coming from fear. All of it. We do have no need to control when we are in a total state of trust. But we can only be in a state of trust when we're really in connection with and in conversation with our true nature. So, of course, I always start within ourselves, right? The conversation that we have within ourselves, the way that we treat ourselves, the way that we embrace all parts of ourselves. We're creating a dialogue. Again, this is reflected in what I spoke about last week. We're getting to know the unique language of ourselves, our emotions, our feelings, our needs, our essence. And the more we do that, the more comfortable we are, because we're at home within ourselves. And so therefore, again, we're at peace. So when we look at consciousness, it's like looking at the water, the ocean that is around us. And the thing is that you'll also then recognize there is no separation. There is no other. Consciousness, what consciousness is it's hard for people to explain actually really the definition of consciousness. And for those of you that want science, there is the science now that is really looking into and finding the proof, if you need it, of consciousness. But consciousness, you could say, is an energy, a frequency. I know that Tesla said that, if you want to understand the universe, look at frequency and vibration. That is consciousness. It is something that is alive. It is something that is everything. Everything. I really understood this when I had my plant medicine journey, that I was having the experience of consciousness in all of these different forms. Sometimes it was a butterfly, another time it was a tree or a human, or it was like a geometric shape. All of it was consciousness playing in different form, expressing itself in different form. But when you recognize that consciousness is something that's alive and it's in constant communication, and this is why I really recommend listening to this podcast with Veda Austin about water, because what you see is water is conscious and water is having a conversation with us. I mean, her experimentation, her studies are just jaw-dropping. It's unbelievable. And she's really researched. It's, there's been the argument of, did she imprint her consciousness onto it and it's just mimicking her, a little bit of what we saw with Emoto's work. If you know anything about his work, she's taken it really to another level to see that actually water is in communication with us and with all things. So for some of you, that might be really far out, but if you're curious, I just think curiosity is the thing of life. That's why children, when they come into this world, they're so curious. They ask a million why questions, which as a parent will drive you nuts, but it's because they're so curious and they're in that wonder and magic of life of, oh, what is this? And how does that work? And, what does that mean? And we lose that as adults. We get a little bit flat. I was saying to a friend of mine, we come into this world soft, open, receptive, connected. We still remember we're connected to source. And then life kind of hardens us. We go through challenge, pain, suffering. We forget who we are. We leave home. And then the arc of life is to kind of go back through all of that, not by circumventing it, but through all of that, because the pain and the suffering is the portal. It is the doorway and the way back in to return to home. Through that arc, we remember again who we are and we come back to softening. So we arrive soft, we get hardened, and we come back to remembering and we soften again. And I like the word soften. It's always the word that I've used because if you meditate, you will be able to be aware of your body, the sensations in your body. I often ask my clients, where do you feel something in your body? Is there tension there? Is an emotion there? Are you breathing? Are you not breathing? Our body is such a wise and very articulate instrument that tells us what's going on within us. When we're in a state of rigidity, in tension, nothing is flowing, and we're often in a kind of resistance and therefore pain and suffering. When we start to build the awareness and the consciousness is the part that observes and sees all things as in conversation with, in communication, in communion with. It's the dance, the eternal infinite dance of existence itself. Once we start to do that within ourselves, then we can exhale, relax. And when we relax, if you're in a meditative state, that's when you can feel the essence of who you are, which is consciousness, which is, you could call it love, you could call it God, you could call it light. Whatever you want to label it as, once you connect to that feeling, you can't unfeel it. You can't forget it because it will feel so familiar to you and it will feel like true home. And home is just where you feel comfortable because you know it. So meditation is also a really important part of this process. But when I say meditate, I don't mean you have to sit in a certain position for a certain amount of time and have no thoughts. That's very rigid. That's setting yourself up for failure because nobody can go 30 minutes without any thought. That's not what meditation is about. Meditation is about being with yourself, coming into stillness, staying with your experience, and simply observing. You're cultivating awareness. When I'm working with clients, and you've heard me say it a million times on here if you followed me, everything starts with awareness. What we're cultivating is awareness. And in the beginning, there's some people that come to me and they just want to kind of fix the problem. And that right there is the wrong attitude, right? Because there's nothing to fix because there is no problem. It's just that that person might be in suffering. They might feel helpless. They might feel out of control. They don't know how to change it. And yet the thing is that we have to acknowledge that we are replicating again and again and again these patterns that aren't serving us. And so we have to become aware of that first and foremost. If we want to change it, we have to become aware of what we're doing without judgment. There's no reprimanding ourselves in this. There's no blame. There's no shame. There's none of that. But we have to acknowledge, this is what I'm doing. And so sometimes it might take months just to recognize what we're doing and to build that self-awareness. Sometimes it might take years. Really, it might take decades, and it's forever evolving. You know, I probably started my path of kind of self-awareness in my teenage years because I was really fortunate to, you know, have a home environment where my parents, my mom and my stepdad, like they meditated, you know, and I would go to Spirit Rock in California and, you know, meditate once a week or whenever I could. So I feel very blessed that I was able to do that. And I was always a very introspective child and asked all of the far out questions, whether it was to someone else or within my own being. But the point is that like, from as an example, I'm not putting myself on any kind of pedestal whatsoever, but I'm just saying that, you know, I'm in my 40s now. So you could say that's like 3 decades of being curious about all of this. So be patient with yourself is the point that I'm trying to make. There is no rush. This is all a journey and an experience. There's no end point. And all the way, if you can just be open and curious and be willing to learn, great. And then happy days. So the first part of understanding ourselves and getting ourselves out of patterns that are essentially just holding us back from our own joy and our own inner peace. We have to build that awareness. And when we understand, it's like having the awareness is building the observer. It's cultivating or connecting to the observer, which is actually always there, but we just might be asleep to it. So awareness is waking up. Awareness is the part that, imagine that you have, like sometimes I walk into my daughter's room at night when she's asleep and I just look over her lovingly. That's like what awareness does. You know, we might be sleeping, but it's looking over us. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to connect to that observer in our waking state with our metaphoric eyes open. And so part of doing this inner work isn't just to work through your patterns and understand your wounding and what are your needs and why did it happen and, you know, because of your childhood and this and that and the other. It's actually the most fundamental part is cultivating this relationship with the part of you that is observing you, which for me, I would call that your higher self. I would call that the state of true, pure consciousness because there is no other, there is no separation, right? But it has the ability to, it is the ocean, it is the water that knows everything that's inside of it. All the creatures inside of its water, it knows, it is observing, it is connected to. That is what consciousness is. That is what our higher self, which is our soul, which is unique. Everyone has their unique soul. We're all interconnected. We're all part of consciousness, but we all have our unique soul. It has its unique expression, or as some people say, its unique signature. Actually, Veda Austin talks about this, about the water, you know, or an image or something, a person, an essence. It has its unique signature, and I love that. So that is the most fundamental thing to actually work on, alongside what we're unveiling and unraveling inside of us, going through our kind of, let's call it our human layers, and going through, you know, whatever trauma or wounding or experiences that have kind of solidified our belief systems and our patterns and how we show up in life and our behavior, what drives our behavior. But alongside cultivating this relationship with the observer, with our higher self, with our soul, just if I'm really honest, it just makes things easier, because then you're not so micro-focused, you know, and then you don't get so exhausted because you're like, oh my God, I have so much work to do on the inside. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that when we expand, we soften, and then we're more connected, we're more interconnected, because it's almost, imagine that when we expand, it's like our tentacles are reaching out and they get to reach towards other tentacle of energy, which is just consciousness. Who is it was saying, forget now because I've watched several different podcasts and videos where, the image of it's meant to be like the finger of God. And I think it was with Darius, right? That's what it was. It was the finger of God. And I don't know who it was. There's two fingers that are coming towards each other. And what they were talking about in this podcast was like, that's when, consciousness is reaching for itself, the divine form and the human form. It's like bringing those two realms together. Because again, they're not separate, but we've just fallen asleep to it. We've forgotten it. So this returning home, this awakening is remembering who we truly are, remembering what we're made of, remembering what we're held within, because so many of us do not feel held. Again, if we live in a realm of fear and separation and division, we are so far away from home, we're scared. And when you're scared, you don't feel safe. And if you try to control things, you don't really feel safe, right? It's all being outside of us. That feeling of being held is like, oh, I'm held by life. I'm held by consciousness. I'm held by love. I'm held by God. I'm held by the universe. I'm held by all that is. And that is such a profound state of being. Because then it's like, it's all okay. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's all okay. It's all just an experience. And I think going back to what I spoke about last week, that Darius was talking about, and actually, interestingly enough, this was also a topic with the water, which I'll get to in just a moment. There is no death. And that is the first fear that we have to confront, we have to face with love. We have been taught, especially in the Western world, the Eastern world has a very, very different relationship, much healthier, in my opinion, to death. The Western world is very like, death is the end, death is terrifying, it's scary, it's painful, it's awful, avoid it at all costs, which is ironic because it's the only thing that is for sure going to happen. But there is no death because the soul is infinite. Yes, the body will die, but the soul doesn't. And so really death is just waking up out of the dream and returning home. That's all it is. From what I've observed, from my own inner knowing, from what I've studied, I really truly believe that that's what it is. But of course, everyone is going to have their own belief, and that's fine. But I do think that there is something that there's a truth in it. There's a knowing in it. The beautiful thing that came out of this conversation with Veda Austin, so she does these experiments where she will write what she's basically discovered, which is amazing, is hydroglyphs. So she will write down a word, she will place the petri dish with water on top of it, she will freeze it, and the water will literally carve out a design that symbolizes that word. And I think she has about maybe 35 hydroglyphs. And she says that might not seem like a lot, but you have to do it over and over and over again to get consistent results, right? When she sees it more than 50 times, she knows, okay, this isn't coincidence. And what was amazing is she had the hydroglyph for living. And then someone asked her, oh, can you please can you write down the word death? I'd like to see what is the hydroglyph or what is the image for death. And so she did it. And when she pulled it out of the freezer, she was like, what is going on here? It's the same hydroglyph as living. And she's like, okay, well, maybe there was some kind of mistake. And she did it again, and she did it again, and she did it again, and again, and again. And again, it came out as the same exact pattern, hydroglyph for living. And it's because water never dies, just like consciousness never dies. So death becomes a concept rather than a actual thing, because in essence, there is no death. There is only living. Consciousness is always alive. She was saying, we can even call it dead water, but it's not dead water. It might just be sick water, but it's not dead, So again, I think this time of awakening that we're going through right now is just, for me, it's really a remembrance, remembering who we truly are, where we come from, what we're made of, what all of this is, but actually just remembering how beautiful and exquisite this experience is. And how when you feel that everything is interconnected, not only interconnected, but in communication with, and I really want to point that out, in communication with, because we are beings that want relation. We're relative beings. We relate to each other. The conversation is what makes us feel in connection with each other. And it's really that, it's connection. I say communication, conversation, but it doesn't need to be through words, right? This is a great example. It can be through images. It can be through a sense of feeling. Ever since I was young, I communicate with trees. Some people might think that's total horseshit, but I have had such amazing experiences where I know that I'm hearing the being of the tree. And actually, the morning that in the evening, my waters broke. In the morning, I stood by this tree, against this tree that I used to always communicate with. And I so clearly heard the message in its own metaphoric way that like my baby was arriving. And just there was a bunch of wisdom in what the tree was sharing with me. And that night, my waters broke. So, to some people that kind of scoff and go, oh, that's just your imagination. Okay. You can believe that. My honest response to that is I feel sad. I feel sad because that just shows someone that is really, really far away from home, really far away from what is. And if that's their journey in life path, that's okay. There's no judgment. I just feel sad because there's such a beauty that comes when we feel the interconnectedness of all things and all beings. Because you know what most humans are afraid of? Being alone. And yes, of course, there is something to being with another human being. A lot of us want to be in relationship, in a romantic, loving relationship, have family, have close friends. Of course, that is so natural. But don't forget that even if you're physically on your own as a human being without other human beings around you, you are never alone. Because go in nature and you won't be alone. Look at the sky and you won't be alone. Look at the trees, look at the earth, look at your feet, just be in the awareness and the presence of all that is alive around you. And you will recognize you're not alone. So yesterday I had the whole day on my own, and I woke up with a little bit of just sadness, a little bit of anxiety because I'm going through so much change right now. So there's a lot to do. I just felt a little bit like tender and emotional, and felt a little bit at one moment felt a little bit lonely. And then I was taking a walk and I was listening to the last hour of this podcast. And I had I spoke to my tree here. I call her the grandmother tree. And I just received an amazing message from her. And then as I was walking back, I just looked up at the sky and I just felt this profound feeling of love. And I just looked up at the sky and I was like, I love you. I love you. And I just felt this amazing love pour into my heart. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is because if you're on your own, and maybe you're someone, a lot of people come to me that want to be in a relationship and that have been single for a long time. And so there's loneliness in that. I totally get it. But if you're one of those people listening in and you're just yearning for that love, which of course that kind of love with another human being is very special and it's very unique and it's very unique to this human form. But you can, in a different way, have that feeling of love in your daily life. Because that was my experience. It was like I felt the most profound love, as if you're falling in love with someone. But I just happened to be looking at the sky. So part of remembering who we are and recognizing that we are consciousness and that consciousness is all things and it's interconnected. It goes back to, you might want to call it a cliche by now, but like that all is one. We're all cut from the same silk, right? Well, I say silk. The term is cut from the same cloth, but interestingly enough, silk has a very, very high frequency. And she talks about this in the podcast because in India, the women run the water that they collect through their silk saris because it purifies the water. And also it gives them spiritual, their belief is that it gives them spiritual knowledge. So it's interesting that was the word that came out of my mouth. See, this is the thing that's beautiful too. When you start to connect to these things and awaken, that's all it is, awaken, you're remembering. You've been asleep, you open your eyes, you awaken, and you remember what this is, who we are. Beautiful synchronicities start to just flow in, left, right, and center. It is so gorgeous. It is so gorgeous. So the invitation is just to get curious. The invitation is to open yourself up to receiving this information, knowledge, which your deeper being already knows. I'm just reminding you, or somebody else will remind you of it. But the invitation is get curious, do the research. Look for the podcasts or the books or the whatever that you can learn more about this from. But as I say that, it's also like if you set the intention within yourself, if you sit and meditate on it, if you just bring the conversation into your mind and allow yourself to expand and be open and receptive to it, you'll actually just start pulling it in. A friend will send you a link to a podcast. Somebody else, like a book might come up on your social media where you're like, ooh, that resonates. I'm going to read that. This is what I mean by synchronicity. Things just start to come in because everything is interconnected. There's an electrical current through all things that are live, and especially when you come up into higher frequencies, right? That's why it's really important, like be in your heart, be in love. Because then you're not going to get the static and the interference of lower density frequencies and fear and all of that kind of stuff that comes with it. But everything becomes interconnected. And one thing that Veda said about water, which I thought was so beautiful, is water is always seeking water. It's like the river that flows to the sea. So if you're one of my singles that are listening to this, water is always seeking water. And it has a unique signature and a unique vibration. So when we're looking for that kind of pairing, that soul connection with someone, just trust that you two are finding each other. You don't have to just find them. You don't have to seek, like you are both finding one another without even needing to try. That will be the natural pull and magnetism. And the only thing that you need to make sure that you're doing is like what Rumi beautifully says, is to remove all the barriers that keep you from receiving love. That's all you need to do. You don't need to find them. You'll find each other. But you need to be true to who you are. You need to be in your true signature. You need to be residing in your heart. Because if you don't, it's not that something bad is going to happen. It just makes it harder. There's more obstacle, right? So that's why Rumi says, remove the barriers. That's all. So get curious about consciousness. And I would love to hear, whoever's listening out there, what is your experience of it? What have you discovered? What do you know? Maybe you're just setting, foot on this new path. Like, what are the things that even after this, listening to this, what are the synchronicities that show up? Because it's so beautiful. And if I'm really honest, I've come in and out of having this relationship with this feeling and this trust and this interconnectivity with existence. And then there are times where I come out of it and I'm just like mad at life. and feel abandoned and just hating on it. And you know what? That's okay too. It's all part of the process and it's all part of the journey. And I've certainly been in times where I will listen to a podcast. There's this woman, Solara, who is just like on cloud nine. She is just flying on a different realm. And when I've gone through really hard times, I'm like, well, damn it, how do I get there? How did she get there? Like I'm just it feels like the depths of hell right now. And you just have to trust that everything has its process. Everything has its own perfect timing. And the easiest and quote unquote fastest way to move through something is just that you have to move through it. You have to feel it and move through it. And so if you happen to be listening to this right now and you're not on cloud nine, you're like in the depths of hell and you're feeling like shit, it's okay. Be with it, stay with it, listen to it, learn from it, love it. You will come out of it. And every time you come out of it, every single time I've come out of like a shadow period of my life, I've always come out through the other side wiser, more connected to my intuition. There's more wisdom there. It's not a bad thing. Again, we need to redefine these things. A shadow period, a dark night of the soul is a metamorphosis. It's a transformation. It's a shedding what you don't need anymore. It's a becoming more of who you are, which is really just remembering who you really are. Stop judging your experience as good, bad, right, or wrong. Learn from it. See that it's there for a reason. It's the catalyst. It's the vehicle for your growth and evolution. It's like what I shared a couple weeks ago about the Japanese couple that I met when I was traveling in my 20s. And his wife had a cold. And we said, oh, how's she doing? And he said, oh, she's very much enjoying her cold. How beautiful is that? Because there was a learning, there was a healing. There was something that was happening and evolving out of that experience. Trust what you're going through. None of it is bad. Listen. Sometimes it's to get your attention. Listen. Heed it. Give yourself what you need, and you will continue to elevate and evolve. And then with every step, you're coming back closer to home. And then how beautiful would it be when humanity, and I believe it will, I think it's going to take a while, but when humanity remembers again who it is, who we are, and we can be in a waking state with all that is. Wow. That's going to be phenomenal. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for listening and traversing this journey with me. And as always, take it or leave it as feels right for you. But I encourage you to be curious. There's no harm. There's no harm in being curious. Loving you so much from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.